All right. Well, Glenn, did you read it yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. Trump just posted. All right. I'm going to read it out to you just now. I just literally saw it as we're going live. I have been asked by the Emir of Qatar, Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Crown Prince of Saudi, and the President of the UAE to hold off on our planned military attack on the Islamic Republic of Iran, which was scheduled for tomorrow, and that serious negotiations are now taking place, and that, in their opinion, as great leaders and allies, a deal will be made, which will be very acceptable to the US, as well as countries in the Middle East and beyond. This deal will include, importantly, no nuclear weapons for Iran. Based on my respect for the above-mentioned leaders, I have instructed Secretary of War Pete Hegseth, Daniel Kaine, and the US military that we will not be doing the scheduled attack of Iran tomorrow, but have further instructed them to be prepared to go forward with a full large-scale assault on Iran on a moment's notice in the event that an acceptable deal is not reached. Thank you for the attention to this matter. So that just came out 4 minutes ago. Let's unpack it. I was just talking with the Professor Gibbs earlier, and we were just talking about how, funny enough, we're talking literally, the whole most of the conversation was how much influence did the Gulf have? And we're surprised. We're like, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. But if this war starts, I said, I'd be very surprised if this war starts, because the Gulf should be able to stop it. And we just got now a post by Trump where he's giving credit to the Gulf countries. So what's your initial reaction?
Well, again, one can, of course, ponder whether or not what he's saying is actually true. If it's not true, then what is it supposed to signal? From Trump's perspective, it's important for him to keep this maximum pressure up. This is his whole approach to foreign policy. So he can signal that he was preparing to go to war. He can attack any time. This is part of the pressure on Iran. Secondary, he can also provide some protection for the Gulf states by arguing that they are the one who's pushing for peace. Because I know that the Iranians, if a war breaks out now, the country that will be hit the hardest, at least what I expect, would be the United Arab Emirates, because Iran will likely try to make an example out of it, given that it's seen as being the most hostile towards Iran and pushing the hardest for U.S. attacks. So it could be a favor to the Gulf states. It could be signaling maximum pressure. Also, of course, it could be true what he's saying, but we don't really know.
Yeah, I think it says a lot that he mentioned them. That's important. I think those Gulf countries want to improve relations with Iran, so they want to take credit for delaying an attack. So I think that says a lot, in my view.
No, I agree with this. It's I think they have to find a way of repositioning themselves at some point after this war is over. Nothing dramatic. People usually associate this with some Cold War alliance swap, but no one's swapping alliances there. They will remain close with the United States, but I think when this war is over and Iran, I assume, will come out on top, its position in the region will be very different, and I assume that a lot of these countries will have to take a bit softer approach to Iran, and it would be beneficial for the United States if it permits this. Otherwise, these countries would put in a position of us or them.
Yeah, I'm just going through some of the any other updates on that front. What's funny is that this came literally minutes after there was a report by Israel that the decision now for attacking Iran is no longer if but when. That came out according to Israeli media about 20 minutes ago. You probably saw that one. So to be honest, I think there might be some truth to this. I know Trump is playing his game and you really can't believe anything he posts. But I think, obviously, we know not everything he posts is true. But everyone now's in the camp that everything he posts is just BS. I think, no, he actually does post the truth sometimes among the 80-90% BS. So you got to try to figure out what's that 5-10% that's actually true. I really think this post has some parts of it that is true. I don't know about whether the strikes were actually imminent. That one I don't know, because they've been imminent for I don't know how long. But I definitely do think that these leaders and the fact that the UAE was mentioned is important. I've been saying for a while the UAE will improve relations with Iran, and we're seeing that right now. everyone was talking about how the UAE, so you mentioned the UAE, Saudi, Qatar. So these are the three he mentioned. So for him to mention Saudi and the UAE, it shows that the two countries that were labeled as the most hawkish on Iran now want to take credit. They're there because they're asked to be there. They want to take credit for trying to achieve peace in the region. So we are seeing the beginning of in my view, a beginning of a shift where the new reality will start to take hold, and that's the Gulf understanding that Iran is there to stay. So I think that's a really important takeaway.
Yeah, well, an alternative interpretation would be that the US is still planning to attack Iran. Again, whenever the US talks about peace and the possibility of negotiations, that's usually when an attack is coming. And by arguing that the Gulf states are pushing hard for, well, essentially convince them not to attack and to go for peace, to essentially spare them from any Iranian retaliation as the US is planning to attack. Again, this would be a bit more of a, not critical, but a sinister interpretation of what the US is doing. Again, it all depends. If they actually sit down and do some serious negotiations, then it's quite possible that it could be true. I'm doubtful though. I think they will go to war, to be honest. But it doesn't mean that the Israeli are necessarily correct either, because they're trying hard to push this war. So, no, I.
Why do you think there'll be war if he delayed it again? And by the way, someone, my team is like Mario. I think this is just PR for the Gulf. That's actually a very good point. He could just be trying to take the Gulf out of it, so the retaliation on the Gulf would be less because the war is imminent.
Yeah, because I'm thinking let's say the US decides to go back to war. We don't know, but if they do, it's a safe assumption that the US will come in very heavy. That is, be extremely brutal in its attacks. Because what's the point of, after finally getting the ceasefire, going back to war, and you're starting to go slowly up the escalation ladder again. So I think they will come in heavy on the attack, so just rush up that escalation ladder. And then begs the question, how does Iran retaliate? Let's say they begin bombing Karg Island or any of the energy installations in Iran. It would have to retaliate in a big way. Now, the Gulf states, of course, are the first target. So no, it could be something that the Gulf states ask for. If you're going to attack, present us as being the peacemakers, essentially.
You still think war is imminent?
It could be imminent, but well, again, I have no crystal ball. But yeah, I think that they will go back to fighting, because there is no solution here for the United States. The solution is essentially tied up to a wider development in the international system, which is this shift from the hegemonic era we had after the Cold War to this new multipolar system. For the US to have peace with Iran, it has to leave and then accept that the Strait of Hormuz is now in Iranian control, and they will use this control in order to reduce the US threats against Iran, both the sanctions as well as the military. So they will punish countries that would that participate in American sanctions. They will punish countries that host U.S. bases. So through the Strait of Hormuz, Iran will get the security it's been denied for the past 47 years. So in order for the U.S. to accept this, they also have to accept a diminished role in the Middle East, and it's a very big step for the United States to accept anything like this. So I don't see it happening. So I think they will go back to war. Again, follow the strategy of hope.
Markets are down. Obviously, not the down as in a bad way. Oil is down. So crude was picked up with the threats were being 112. It's down to 109 now.
Well, yet another different interpretation. That Trump and his buddies put in some bets in the market.
Yeah.
And, well, I know a lot of people say that. I tend to be doubtful. I don't think he makes decisions like this to manipulate the market. I think that he probably tells his buddies before he makes this call so he can make some money at the same time. But I don't. I'm doubtful that this is solely to manipulate markets.
Oh no, 100% no. I think anyone. Yeah. WTI is down from 104 to 101. But you're not seeing those swings like beforehand. If this was a month ago, you'd see like 10% price changes because these announcements are pretty significant. War is imminent. That would be catastrophic for global markets. War has been delayed. That's incredibly good news. But it's obviously still has what he says still has an impact on the market, but a lot less. I think the market has just gotten used to, like, hey, he's going to keep doing this on a daily basis.
Well, this is the boy who cried wolf. He will do this every week. So, yeah.
But Daniel, sorry, Glenn, nothing's changed. Nothing's changed. But back to the negotiations, we've just had all these threats and him walking them back. Other than the Gulf countries being mentioned, which is the only significant thing out of this, in my opinion, nothing else has changed. The same issues we're discussing before. Iran having very significant demands. The Americans not conceding on much. There was a report that according to the Iranians, the US is conceding on Iran's on unfreezing Iranian assets and lifting of sanctions. There's been some concessions on the American side on that front, including the unfreezing of about a quarter of their assets, of Iranian assets. So that came out as good news today. I'll try to find out the exact details. It came from Tasnim, and it said that Iranian state media reports the US has agreed to waive Iranian oil sanctions as well. So 25% unfreezing of assets and the lifting of the waiving of Iranian oil sanctions in the negotiations, according to Tasnim. So that's like the only positive development. But everything else and the fact that they're very far apart, the same concerns we had a few days ago are still there.
No, well, it's on several issues. Again, I think that on the nuclear issue, a deal can be made because there's many possibilities of finding a common meeting point. So, there's also some reports that the Iranians would accept storing some of the enriched uranium in Russia, for example. So there are some possibilities there. If the goal again is for Iran not to have nuclear weapons, Iran has said already that they don't intend to develop nuclear weapons. I think it could be a rational choice, given that if they acquire it, it will spread across the region. I don't think they want this. I think they will get the weapons if it's necessary, if they are convinced that the US and Israelis will not stop attacking them and that they need this deterrent. So I think a deal can be made with Iran on the nuclear issue based on the JCPOA, something along those lines. But I think the main difficulty is to get a deal on the Strait of Hormuz, because, as I said, this essentially is not just the Iranians setting up a toll. It reflects something much, much wider, which is the end of the era of U.S. global primacy. And I don't think the U.S. is ready to let go just yet.
Yeah, Iran's already created an X account for the Persian Gulf Strait Authority to control the Strait of Hormuz, to manage it. Have you seen that?
No.
They have no joke, the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. It's open an X account. Obviously, it has a website. So I think while we're going back and forth in these negotiations, Iran is just moving ahead with the new world order or the new framework they've been discussing with Putin and Xi.
No, but they're not gonna. I don't think they're gonna negotiate away this. So they might as well start to implement it, because it's gonna be here to stay. And I think it could be actually better to move the negotiations on, just leave the Americans with a fait accompli. Just, well, this is already here. We're not removing it, and I think this is the difficult part for Trump, because I think he was hoping that destroying Iran or regime changing Iran would be some low hanging fruit. And if it wasn't, I think he was going to pull off the same trick he did in Yemen, that is just declare victory and go home. But what the Strait of Hormuz represents is that there's no going back to the old status quo if the war would fail. So this is also, there's no way he can, not just the U.S. empire, which is weakened severely, but also his presidency. There's no way he can claim victory here. And a lot of what you and I have spoken about over the past 2.5 months now has been, many people were dismissing it as, well, of course the Iranians not going to win. That's mullah propaganda. But now you see Robert Kagan, you see all these neocons and establishment figures coming out and essentially confirming what we've been saying since day one, that this is a war that US can't win, and they can't go back to the status quo either. So this is a massive strategic defeat. It's quite a disaster for the US. So it's understandable from that perspective that Trump isn't quite ready yet to accept this defeat, and might have another go at it.
I am though surprised by the military capabilities of Iran, because they were bombed so much. I knew strategically they'll win because of the Strait of Hormuz, but I didn't know the reports that 70 or 90% of their missile capabilities are still operational. That is freaking wild, considering the amount of ordnance that was dropped on the country. That is crazy numbers. I know they've been preparing for decades, but holy shit. How deep underground are these guys? That's insane. It reminds me of the Lord of the Rings caves with the goblins underground. It's insane.
Yeah, but it's been, 22 years since they were referred to as being part of this axis of evil. I think they've had plenty of time to see what would eventually come. So they've been preparing. Again, all these tunnels underground where they can produce weapons, store weapons. We don't really know that much, so they can. And again, when the Iranians refer to the endless supply of weapons they have, we don't know what is actually true. They have every incentive in the world to exaggerate these numbers, but there's likely a lot of truth to this, though.
And these are the numbers, by the way. The numbers are 70-90% is coming out of CNN and New York Times, according to the missile capabilities of Iran that are still intact. Is it possible that he's bluffing again? He's bullshitted them twice. Someone from my team is like, there's three options, Mario. One of them is regional nations, the Gulf countries, convince him not to do this because they didn't want their energy infrastructure struck. Number two is there is a planned attack for tomorrow, and by saying he won't attack, he's trying to fool Iran again, but he will attack. And number three is Trump is lying. There was never a planned attack tomorrow, and he's just trying to pressure Iran. So there's three options here. This was all a bluff. All this is BS. He's trying to pressure them. Gulf countries did convince him not to attack, or he's still planning to attack and he's trying to bluff.
No, all of the above could be true. This is the but this is the problem. But it's also a wider problem. I mean, he takes great pride in this whole deception that he comes with this little comforting statements to make the opponent lower their guard before attacking. But this is a nice attack strategy, but it ruins the possibility for peace, because whatever deal he wants to push with the Iranians, say, remove the sanctions, for example, all of this becomes quite meaningless, because you don't know if it's just a ploy. If the next day other new sanctions comes back on, if there's no trust, it's very difficult to have any agreement.
Yeah, that's true.
But again, I one of the reasons I think they're going back to war as well is that the China meeting with Xi Jinping didn't go as well as they would have hoped. Indeed, all the BS coming out of Washington kind of reveals many things. It reveals what they wanted, and it also contrasted with what they actually got, because they wanted, obviously, China to come with very strong statements, both on the nuclear issue and the Strait of Hormuz. And we learned this because that's where they lie the most. They made the point, well, first they made a big point out of China saying Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, which sounds like support for the US. But Iran has said themselves they don't want a nuclear weapons. This is not controversial. The Russians say the same. They don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. Everyone's on the same page. Not one country in the world are saying that they want the Iranians to have nuclear weapons. But then the US also made some statements about eliminating or handing over all the enriched uranium, and but the Chinese never confirmed this. They dismissed it. So there's a lie, and that's also quite revealing when the US feels the need to try to control the narrative. But also on the Strait of Hormuz, the statements that China also agrees that there has to be an open access to the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this can mean many things. I think if the US is successful in defeating Iran, that doesn't mean the Strait of Hormuz will be open. I think on the contrary, they will, does the Chinese have free access now to Venezuela, to Cuba? I think a US victory would close it down to their main peer competitor. So I think for the Chinese to have access to the Strait of Hormuz, the best thing is if the Iranians come out on top and give them special treatment. So a lot of the things that you hear out of Washington, it doesn't mean much. Well, they're obviously lies, or they're spinning reality. But when they do so, you also, of course, learn what's important for Washington and what they wanted from the Chinese, which they didn't get.
Yeah, there's. I was speaking to a China expert earlier. It was a great conversation. She gave me a lot of insight. So number one is, she said, on the Chinese side, they gave those, the political rhetoric support to Trump. Things like there shouldn't be a fee at the Strait of Hormuz, okay? But then when it comes to the UN Security Council, China did not approve the resolution to, I think, allow free passage through the Strait of Hormuz, or something about Iran not being able to control the Strait of Hormuz. So when it came to action, they did not deliver on that promise. So at point number one. Point number two, she told me she believes that Trump and she had a secret meeting. A lot of reports about them having a private meeting other than the meetings we know about. They're part of the ones that were publicly disclosed. And based on what she's seeing, that, Trump did not get what he wants whatsoever in any way, which kind of is in line with what you're saying. And then the rhetoric support doesn't mean anything. It's the actions that follows what matters more.
Well, I think the Chinese sorry. I was going to say, I think the Chinese will go to a great extent to make the Americans happy. That is, if there's something that's not of very strategic significance. So, for example, limiting, putting some restrictions on chemical exports that would, linked up to fentanyl. The fentanyl problem in the United States. All of this, is things because they would like to keep the Americans happy. Xi Jinping also referred to this Thucydides trap. So he's quite well aware that as the U.S. empire is in relative decline and the Chinese are growing, that there's a high risk of conflict. They don't want a conflict with the United States. They want to manage this transition in the world order. So they would like things to go smoothly. Furthermore, we're heading towards possibly now return to an all-out war again with Iran. And this time, I think it's going to be much higher intensity. They're going to go after energy infrastructure and a lot of things they didn't do the last time. And also, I think also moving towards a massive war with Russia as well. So given all of this, it makes sense for the Chinese not to want to rock the boat, but they're not going to hand over any advantage to the US, which will strengthen the Americans against the Chinese. But luckily, Trump and Xi wants the same thing. Trump wants some superficial, flashy things he can show off to the media to show that, he's a great negotiator. And the Chinese would like him to, leave with a smile on his face. And they give him something, but they're not going to hand over, any strategic advantage.
Yeah, by the way, Kashim Island's air defense systems were active in Kashim Island in the last few minutes against some drones, apparently. I want to, before we go back to Iran and the various options that Trump has on the table, I want to go to Russia quickly because things have escalated there, and that's something you've been covering for an extremely long time. What can you kind of give us an update of what's happening? We've seen a massive attack by Russia against Ukraine. We've seen a massive attack by Ukraine against Russia, including Moscow. We've also seen the rhetoric. There was someone on your show that Larry Johnson was referencing, who was the name slips in my mind, but you'll mention him now. Was it so? That was him and Sergei Karaganov, where both have been talking about the potential, or the advocating for strikes on NATO territory against infrastructure that is used in the war effort against Russia. That includes drone manufacturing facilities and warehouses as well. And they've also hinted at the at least the consideration of a tactical nuke against Ukraine. So we're seeing a massive shift in the rhetoric, and I can't remember who I was speaking to, but they said, Mario, if there's ever a time to escalate on the Russian side, if Putin's really considering it, this is the time to do it, because the US has never been stretched this thin, and Trump is very distracted, and the US military is very weak right now, considering their stockpiles. So maybe can you give us a quick recap on the front? I know also Russian advances have slowed. There's even been counter advances on the Ukrainian side. So what are the wins and losses on each side? What have been Ukrainian wins this year? And of course, Ukrainian losses. And also, what are the concerns that are being echoed right now by many as well?
Well, the front lines. Well, the Russians are moving forward, but it's going very slowly. And the Ukrainians also have some of their own offensive in which they're able to take territory. Overall, the larger picture is that the Russians continue to march forward, and but again, both sides taking casualties. The Ukrainians are taking
much slower than before. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it some of the momentum appears to have slipped. So at least that's the impression I'm getting. But this could also be reversed quickly, because the Russians are, on some areas they're doing well, and the main target for them is Donetsk. And if they're able now to envelop essentially Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, which are the two main cities there, and they're moving towards this, that's pretty much the end of Donetsk. Then they have all of Donbass, which is Lugansk and Donetsk. If this is the case, then that removes one of the most difficult aspects of a negotiation, because the Russians have demanded that the Ukrainians vacate this area, because they say this is Russian territory. But it's very hard for the Ukrainians after 4+ years of fighting to leave well defended cities to Russia, which they consider to be their own. So it's very painful concession to ask of the Ukrainians. So it might be easier once they're actually being pushed out of these cities. So again, Putin made a comment. He thinks the war is coming to an end, possibly because he sees the capture of Donetsk in the near future. But I think for me, the most dangerous aspect of this war is how it became internationalized, how it's spreading. Again, it should be uncontroversial, because the main reason why countries often don't send weapons to countries at war is because they become participants. And we've seen now for more than 4 years the NATO countries gradually escalating, from the beginning when the Germans only wanted to send helmets because they didn't want to be participants. Yeah. You and I talked about how Biden said that F-16s means World War III. The NATO, they crossed all of this a long time ago, and at every step the Russians had a dilemma. They could either retaliate against NATO and face and risk world war, or they could let it go and only strike it back against the Ukrainians, but then embolden NATO further. Now, of course, the voices in Russia were saying, we have chosen wrong. We've been emboldening NATO. We should have struck hard back right at the beginning when NATO began to do these things. They are winning the argument now. And as you said, people like Karaganov, he wrote speeches for Brezhnev. He advised Gorbachev, Yeltsin, Putin. He was actually head of my department when I worked in Moscow. And he's also the one who convinced Putin to lower the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons in the Russian nuclear doctrine. And now I heard from also Dmitry Polyansky, who's the Russian representative to the UN. Now he's at the OSCE. I'm actually talking to him as well on my channel in 2 days from now. And he's also suggesting that it's not if, it's when we retaliate, because the Europeans have now crossed the line. And that's on the weekend now. We had this massive attack on Moscow. And we have to be honest, this is, all these attacks deep inside Russia, these are NATO weapons. They are NATO war planning, NATO intelligence, NATO target picking. They have NATO contractors. It's they are as deeply involved as they can be. And at the same time, now you're seeing you have European governments now saying very openly, what is our objective? Well, we want to bring the war to Russia. We want to destroy their energy infrastructure. And how do we do it? Well, we're going to start to mass produce long-range weapons to strike deep inside Russia. So we said what their intent is. We want to bring the war deeper into Russia. We're producing the weapons, and we will participate in using them to attack Russia. All of this. No, and if anyone says, "Well, this sounds like crazy. This is how you end up in a World War III," those people will immediately be pushed aside. There's no room for this kind of debate or talks in Europe. Everyone has to be gung-ho for war. Everyone has to pretend as if this is not us participating in the war, that we're attacking Russia. So there's a very weird mood in Europe these days, the reluctance to accept the world as it is. I mean, imagine when the Americans and its allies attacked Iraq. Imagine if the Russians would then begin to target American soldiers in Iraq. That would be one thing. But beginning to send missiles into the U.S., bombing American cities. I mean, it would be it would be a declaration of war.
You're saying Europeans said they want to fire missiles themselves into Russia?
No, not themselves. They say they will mass produce long-range weapons, and they've already stated that the goal is to bring the war to Russia. And
but I have a question. I have a quick question on that. Can I make the same argument that if Iran is using Russian missiles and drones to strike American targets right now in the conflict, wouldn't that be very similar? And they're using intelligence from China and Russia. Isn't that the same thing?
Well, then Russia is becoming a participant in the war. People said this as well. Like, okay, well, what does this mean? Yeah, I know. That's. But that's it. No. Well, as
I was hoping you'd correct me.
No, well, it's not black or white. I mean, it's North Korea participant in the war in Ukraine? Well, yes, they're sending soldiers. They're fighting there with the Russians in Ukraine. Of course, they're participants. I mean, but it's not always black or white. You do have different shades there. To what extent? So, for example, the Russians, they wouldn't want to use their own missiles or drones to hit American troops, probably, but they would give the intelligence to tell the Iranians where they are. And so I think they moved cautiously, and that's what NATO did in the beginning as well. They did cautiously, but then they noticed, there's no reaction from the Russians. They're not hitting back. So then this more and more powerful weapon. They become more and more bold in terms of the targeting, and that's where we are now. And now essentially the people like Karaganov, who in the beginning, he was making the point that in the beginning he was saying, listen, we need to restore deterrence. We have to essentially drop a nuke on the Germans, and then the Europeans will wake up, and a bit like the Cold War, when we knew better that you don't bomb Moscow. I mean, this is crazy. But he said that then he used to be in a small minority. Now he's leading the vast majority who says this is enough. Now it's time to strike back at Europeans. So no, I'm very convinced the Russians will retaliate against Europe. And when would this be done? No, I think it's a good timing now. The Americans are overstretched. They are stuck in Iran. Trump already made enough statements about the Europeans not helping him out in Iran, so they're on their own. I mean, it is a good timing, sadly, and I say that as someone who's sitting in Europe. So no, we're walking towards
where again?
war.
Where were you in in Nordic countries? No.
Yeah, I'm in Norway now.
Norway, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a place in Australia. If you're.
Yeah,
we both might need to go to Australia, man. I'm in the UAE and you're in Norway. We both might need to go as far as possible to Australia.
I took over a flat there, 5 days ago. So I'm.
You do have a place in Australia.
Yeah, Sydney. So well, we bought it, but in Australia you need solicitors and all and it's a long process. So we bought it like a month ago, but we only took it over 5 days ago. So we're planning to go into exile.
Are you being serious?
No, I'm not going to stay here anymore.
Not about buying it. Oh wow, you're worried about.
Oh no, I did buy it. Yeah.
No, not about this. I'm asking, are you actually worried about the state of Eastern Europe?
Oh no, I think Europe we were heading towards war. I mean, I've been saying this for many years. I remember I was giving a speech at my university back in was it November or December of 2013 that, you know, if we topple Yanukovych, this is going to be a horror show. This is going to, the Russians will hit back very hard. This is, you know, posing an existential threat. Oh, well, no. If you care about Ukraine, then you ignore what Russia's warnings are. And, you know, essentially everything is always two camps. Either you're pro-Russian or you're pro-West in Ukraine. And at every turn, you have to ignore common sense. And then, of course, we had 7 years of this Minsk agreement when we saw the West undermining it and sabotaging it. Meanwhile, the argument there as well was always, well, let's just look the other. Well, if you want to impose it as good for Russia, that means it's not good for us. And at every step, they framed everything as being either, you know, if you want restraint, you're pro-Russian. But, you know, look, I've said all along, we're going to go to war with Russia if we continue down this path. Then, of course, you have 2022. It begins with these smaller little weapons. So let's send, you know, some javelins. We begin with this in 2017. And look where we are now. The Europeans, even without American clear backing, talking about mass producing long-range weapons to strike deep inside Russia. The Russians are going to hit back. It's I make this point, and in Europe they consider this to be they call it pro-Russian argument that Russia will retaliate. So we have this mentality in Europe that if you're really patriotic and you're pro-European, you just, you know, tie a blindfold on yourself and pretend everything is fine. No, I think we're going to war. It's we're not going to win this, because you can't defeat the world's largest nuclear power if it thinks it's facing an existential threat. If the Europeans are successful, it's going to be nuclear weapons on our heads. So we're going somewhere very dangerous, I think. And but again, it's been this slow incrementalism now since 2014, and it's like, where else is this going to go? Every month there's a new escalation. The Europeans and the US decides to take it a little bit further. How long can this go?
Why not continue it on the battlefield?
If
Russia's winning, if the Russians are winning and they're advancing, why not keep advancing, keep winning that way? Why escalate and risk a broader conflict? I'm not saying Europeans are not escalating, but I'm saying why not continue the current warfare as is now?
Well, that's been the logic. The Russians are saying, well, we're gradually, incrementally grinding down the Ukrainian army. We're grinding down all the weapon storages, which has been emptied across NATO. The European economies are going down. The public is losing their support for the war. So all the indicators are looking well. However, the problem is that the Europeans will not put an end to this war. They will continue to fight it because, well, they're fighting it with the Ukrainians. So for this reason, as things go south on the battlefield, the Europeans will do the predictable thing. They will escalate to compensate for the losses. And now that's happening at a time when the US is pulling back as well. So you have this very dangerous scenario. The Europeans are escalating, the Americans are pulling back, and the Russians are in desperate need to restore their deterrent. So we have the perfect recipe now for a massive war, which is why I think it's coming, unless there's a big change.
That's what I want to ask you about. By the way, there's just been a shooting in California in the Islamic Center of San Diego. 2 people have been killed, multiple others injured. I saw footage of someone just in a pool of blood that we can't play on YouTube. So it's unfortunate. It's whenever you have war, you just start having a lot of hate and hate-inspired crime. We've seen that against synagogues, and we're seeing now against an Islamic center as well. Just on your point, first, I agree 100% in how we're just boiling ourselves slowly. So many unthinkable things have become reality, and look where we are now. A regional war in the Middle East, almost a regional war in Europe, depending how you want to define a regional war. But I wouldn't say it's the same as the Middle East. And, you know, the war drums on Taiwan and China escalating the rhetoric there, and Trump now talking about Taiwan not declaring independence and maybe using Taiwan as a negotiating chip. So can't believe we're here, yet we are here. But based on what you're saying, if you think that that Russia's going to escalate against NATO directly through asymmetric means or direct strikes, 2 questions: will the US respond as part of Article 5? And number two, what you're describing is like, if that isn't a world war, I don't know what is.
Well, regarding the U.S. response, I don't know. It could go both ways, but again, this is why for the Russians they see this as a dilemma, because if they strike NATO, then they might attack Russia, and then we'll have a massive direct war. On the other hand, the Russians, they can't accept a scenario or situation as we have now, when the Europeans and the Americans can just attack Russia at will and just do it through the Ukrainians, and then only have a one-sided war. So I think they're leaning more now towards the argument that, well, they don't have any war objectives besides restoring their deterrence. So it's not as if they're going to conquer the Baltic states or occupy Poland or something. All they need to do is hit the Europeans hard, and then make it clear that if they continue firing at Russia, then the Russians will retaliate. This is the direction we're going, though. So I think again, that's why it's a dilemma. I think for the Russians, neither of these two options are very good, and that's why they previously favored the first one. But there's been a shift now, and I think
does the world understand they're weakening each other and just letting China dominate? All of them, Russia, Europe, US, Middle East with the split in the Gulf, etc. Everybody, and the only country getting stronger is China, not Russia, not Europe, not the Middle East.
It reminds me a bit about the 19th century. Then you had the British and the Russians locked into this rivalry, and they think that the world will always focus around them, and at the same time you see the emergence of these other centers of power. You have the Americans growing, you have the Germans, you have the Japanese. So it's quite common that when you have a great power rivalry, new centers of power emerge at the periphery. But no, you're right. China is its main strategy now is, and I think that's also why they want to make Trump leave with a smile, is just keep things calm, and whoever is able to manage peace now, they're the one who will succeed. It's all the countries that get boiled down in wars, which will be weakened. So, we are all weakening. The Americans are weakening. Europeans are weakening. This is not good for the Russians either. It's Iran will have some benefits as it wins the war, that it can get out of the sanctions and all this. But of course, they're taking a lot of punishment, a lot of destruction going their way as well. So, in relative terms, the Chinese are the only one doing well now.
Are you worried about a world war?
Yeah, no, I think everyone should be. That's one of the frustrating things in Europe now. I think one of the problems when you have a war going for so long is that the war propaganda, which has been going for so long, it's people become indoctrinated. They don't see. They think now fear of world war is appeasement, essentially, and that's what the kind of rhetoric you've seen from the Europeans during the Cold War. We recognized that the nuclear deterrence was what was going to prevent a major war. Now they call it nuclear blackmail, and they consider it immoral to worry about it. So if someone says maybe we should avoid make sure we don't provoke a nuclear war, then the argument is always, well, then we allow Putin to use his nuclear weapons to bully others and use it for blackmail. So this is kind of the new language there is, which is the immorality of respecting the nuclear deterrent. So no, it's that's why there's a need to put an end to this war quickly, these wars, because the longer these wars go on, the more they will escalate. And the main how I think we're going to end up in a direct war, if it happens, I mean, nothing's certain, is this delusion of escalation control. That is, that the Europeans, as well as the Americans, think they can, as long as they gradually escalate this slow incrementalism, then there won't be any reaction. And that's essentially what NATO's always done quite well, this slow incrementalism. But at some point, the Russians will retaliate, and we're going to go very quickly up that escalation ladder. And I think at that point, no one's going to be able to reduce it. And I think, Iran is a good lesson from this. You go up that escalation ladder and there's no way out. And I think we're going to go this way with the Russians now as well. First, the Russians will begin now. I think over the next days or weeks, you will see more brutal attacks on Ukraine. And then the Europeans will not take the message. Instead, they will then incentivize or encourage more direct attacks on Moscow, more belligerent statements. And then you will have a conventional attack on the Europeans. And from there on, I think it will probably escalate to, not probably, it could escalate to at least a tactical nuclear strike. I would bet on Estonia or Germany, to be honest. But again, I'm not watching what do you call it? I don't have a crystal ball here. So
a tactical nuclear strike on NATO, not on Ukraine.
No, I think Estonia or Germany. But I think a conventional strike. I think we're still far away from it. But again, look where we were 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It's what other directions can this take? What do we think is going to happen when we now
a deal? I know it's been a long time.
Yeah,
and longer than I would have expected.
Yeah, no, well, again, if
you see new leaders, there's a political shift. Sorry, a political shift in Europe. All these leaders are going to be replaced by ones that would want the war to end for the sake of Europe and the energy sector, at the cost of Ukrainians that want their land back, unfortunately. But that's the reality of it. But that would be like a better solution than a direct conflict. All that Putin needs to do is just keep waiting.
Yeah, but the waiting assumes that the status quo will remain stable, but there is no status quo. The escalation continues. Every time they don't retaliate, it will only escalate further because it emboldens the opponent. But no, I agree. I think that there are some who recognize that this is spinning out of control.
Sorry, if you don't mind, what have the escalations been recently? Because obviously I haven't been keeping up as much as I should recently. Is there any new weapons equipment? If anything, it's been de-escalatory because the Europeans don't have the same capacity to supply Ukraine because of how thin American military is. So is there anything happening where it is escalating on the European side?
Oh, I think the attack on Moscow, very much so. This is no way the Ukrainians did this by themselves. They work hand in hand with the Western intelligence services, including the Americans, by the way. So, but while this is happening, as we're going up that escalation ladder now, which I think will intensify, at the same time, you have some people recognizing that things can go very wrong very quickly, which is why you have now. I saw in Politico today, for example, that Angela Merkel criticizes the EU because they haven't been doing diplomacy with Russia. I mean, the EU has been boycotting diplomacy for more than 4 years now, so it's a bit late for her to recognize this now and to criticize this now. But they know what's happening. They know where this is all heading. So there are some voices coming up. So we'll see what comes first. Either they recognize the disaster we're moving towards, and they're able to get diplomacy going again, or we go to war. But the status quo, it doesn't exist. We are on this. We have been gradually going up that escalation ladder for a long time, and as you said, it's always made sense for the Russians. Oh, we're winning. Let's not create too many waves and spread the conflict with risking a direct war with the West. But I think at this point in time, again, because the Europeans are getting much bolder, they're stating clearly their objective, what they're planning to do, and the Americans are. If you would assess the threat from America, their capabilities are being drained in the Middle East, and also the intentions have been stated quite clearly that they don't necessarily feel the same need to come to the Europeans' aid, and so I think this would be. Again, not a good word to use, but an opportune time to essentially restore deterrence. And this is essentially the argument which is now winning in Moscow. So I think we're going to go there in the foreseeable future.
Which argument is winning? It's the one of escalation. How specifically? You're talking about both a tactical nuclear strike on Ukraine as well as a direct strike on NATO, or some other form of escalation? Because you're talking about almost like a worst case scenario.
I don't think they would use a tactical nuke against the Ukrainians. It's a bit like on the battlefield when they capture Ukrainians, they take them prisoners because they are Ukrainians. They are,
tactical nuke on Ukraine.
but they're protecting
Just to
their own
correct what I
land.
mean. Just what I mean.
Yeah.
Sorry, tactical nuke on Ukraine. What was the rhetoric before was like, hey, you warn where you're going to strike to avoid casualties, give them a few days to evacuate, and strike it more of a warning rather than one of destruction. So a tactical strike as a nuke, as a warning shot to stop the escalation on the European side.
No, I think it's more likely to hit the Europeans, to be honest. But they will start with the Ukrainians. I think they will strike with new weapons. They will, something that is meant to wake up the Europeans. But there would be, Reshniks or other new weapons they would introduce. So they will start with introducing new weapons. They will do more heavy strikes on Ukraine, and then they move into a conventional strike on the NATO territory. And after this, I think the next step going up the escalation ladder will be a tactical nuclear weapon, which is again very different from a strategic nuclear weapon, which is meant to wipe out cities. This is essentially a big boom, but not a
limited destruction. More that we cross the red line. It's more of a warning shot. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. But again, I think
what's more likely, the US and or Israel using a nuke against Iran, or Russia using a nuke against NATO?
I think that's a good question. I think Israel probably would be number one on that list because if it looks like the US is preparing to pull out and accept defeat, this, for the Israelis, if they say Iran is an existential threat, it's not that far-fetched. The Israelis do have some major problems. They have huge divisions within their own society. They have Iran, which is seen as their main enemy, who would do anything they could to help to, end the Jewish state. So I think it's they might see this an existential threat, and they would use a nuclear weapon. It's not unthinkable, but I think it's much more likely than the Americans using a nuke against the Iranians.
And then 6 months later, me and you are talking about Chinese threats to nuke Taiwan. That's how the world is heading. We're like, both of them turn out to be less of a risk than China using a nuke against Taiwan. I know it's unlikely, but I'm just saying what I mean is that the world is just so unpredictable. And
well, here's the problem. You have this big, great power compromises, establishment of new world orders, new systems after major wars. You got it after the Napoleonic Wars, you get it after World War I, you get it after World War II. It's very unusual for countries to be able to come to such great power agreements before a war. So usually they need a war in order to set a new status quo. The problem is we have nuclear weapons now, so it's going to be very messy.
Exactly.
if we do this time as well. But this is where we're going. So ideally, we would have some great diplomats, and you would have the great powers, get the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, Iranians, have everyone sit around the table, find some solutions. But we don't have this. Indeed, the Europeans are possibly the worst. They don't even want to talk to their opponent. This is the discussions they're having now in Europe is, should we talk to Russia? Okay, if we talk to Russia, who should represent us? Should it be Callas? Should it be Merkel? If we are talking to the Russians and we decide who should represent us, what should our demands be? So at the end of the day, even if they can agree on all of these things, it's probably going to end up with something ridiculous like sending Kaja Kallas demanding the capitulation of Moscow or something. So it's a long process of criminalizing diplomacy, essentially. Not even being able to talk to the opponent is... and to be honest, this was Trump's strength. He was able to break these things and say, well, listen, I talk to anyone. This is, unusual in the West at the moment. I mean, which Western leader could possibly go meet with, Kim Jong-un, for example. No one could. It would be too high diplomatic cost. They say, oh, we can't talk to him. We don't, we don't agree with him. So this is kind of this has become the political class in the West now. There are 12-year-old girls in the schoolyard not wanting to talk to the other girls, trying to freeze them out. This is not statesmanship. This is not statecraft. This is basic diplomacy. If you don't sit down with people you already agree with, you sit down with the one you don't agree with. I mean, this should be common sense, but we abandoned it a long time ago.
Yeah, Trump could have done that, but he don't know what the hell happened. He was the definition of that, of breaking the status quo and doing the unthinkable, but he took a very different direction. Look, I still have hope. I'm saying this. I really think if Iran just calmed down with their requests, Trump will walk away with a massive loss, pretend it's a win, and just move on and do his thing in other places. Again, I don't like his approach to international law. I don't like his approach to the EU, to NATO. I just all think that's just not the right to do it. However, I like his initial approach to Putin, and maybe he could do it again. He could, because if he loses in Iran, he may be desperate to get some win to make up for it. And that could be Lebanon, which he's really trying to get something to happen in Lebanon. Could be Russia.
Oh, yeah. Well, Lebanon's going to be tied too closely to Iran, so it's going to be difficult. Russia, I think that he's outsourced this completely now to the Europeans. I think if any country will suffer greatly from Iranian victory, it will probably be Cuba, because it's Trump likes the low-hanging fruit, so it would be something. And also the other great powers is less likely to intervene if it's in the Western Hemisphere, as it's America's backyard. So I think a defeat in Iran you can make up by pillaging, Cuba on the way home. But you're right. A lot of the things he's done has been so unnecessary. Like the Europeans, for example, I'm usually the first one to criticize them because they're quite horrible. But a lot of the relationships could have been managed very differently. I mean, threatening to invade Greenland, all this, this attempt to humiliate all the leaders. I think, yeah. I mean, the relationship has to be remanaged. Well. Redefined, because again, the bipolar world is over, the unipolar world is over. They have to find a new way of working together. But this is going to fuel a lot of anti-American sentiments across Europe. I often think of the Americans and the Europeans a bit like the Russians and Ukrainians. Solzhenitsyn once said that, he wrote that the close connection between the Russians and Ukrainians was a double-edged sword, because on one hand, some of the Ukrainians considered Russians to be brotherly people, but the other Western Ukrainians then saw this close relationship as being something that would consume their sovereignty, because if you're the same people, why are you sovereign? So they would see the Russians as a threat, while the others would see them as a brother. It's a bit like the same with the Europeans. Either they're so close to the Americans, some can't imagine living without American leadership, and others hate the Americans because they consider them to be their influence to be too intrusive. So in Europe, we're either hateful of the we're hateful of the Americans, or we are just very, very obedient. So we should find a new way of working with them. And I thought Trump could have helped reorient towards this new distribution of power, but I think it's going to fuel a lot of anti-American sentiments across Europe, which is a shame. I mean, we should get along with the Americans.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, great to chat to you as always. Congratulations on your purchase of the house. I know it's late. You bought it a month ago, so congratulations. Maybe we'll meet up in Australia when I go back there. And I appreciate your analysis as always.
Thank you, Mario. Good to see you.
See you, my friend. All right, guys. Let me know what you think of the conversation itself. I always enjoyed it, Glenn. That's why he's a regular. Such a great person to talk to, and so genuine with his thoughts and the way he articulates them. So, but let me know what you think on his fear of a world war versus my position that I think cooler heads will prevail, even when it comes to Iran. I know I'm always the optimist, but I genuinely think it would take an insane person, whether in Europe, Russia, or the US, to really drag us into a bigger conflict or a global conflict. A prolonged conflict in Iran, or a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. And I don't think the leaders are insane. I criticize a lot of them, if not all of them, but I really don't think any of them are insane, and they're all relatively pragmatic. And that's why I'm more optimistic. But let me know what you think. And I'll see you again with Alex Christoforou in about 10 minutes. Bye, guys.